Okay, so you should see this document in Google Classroom. Should say your name, updated, the first Americans, first peoples, it should say master, which means it's my copy I'm sharing with you. First thing I would do is I would zoom into 100%. Now, this is a new looking document, but you will see a ton of these this year. We do a lot of historical background context first, similarly to that graffiti mystery activity, where we've got to be able to sift through the stuff that's important to know to get down to the facts. So when we look at a new piece of information, we know how to look at it critically. So at this point, I asked you to, when you started today, to define the term primary source. So in this area for number one, I want you to look back to your definition. Give me some ideas of what you think primary sources are. What are some good primary sources? Now, for question two, you're going to read the right hand column and you're going to answer this question: how do historians write history when they don't have primary sources? When we don't have these firsthand accounts, how do we know what the history is? And so that'll give you some context in this paragraph. Third paragraph, then we're asking, how can new scientific evidence create a difficult choice for historians? When we have something we think we know, right? Something that we believe to be true, and then we get a new piece of information, how does that complicate things when we believe we've already made a determination about it historically, especially when we don't have maybe proven evidence or a proven primary source? Why does this create a difficult choice for historians? Number four, what types of evidence, new evidence, are historians utilizing when they investigate the first Americans? Now, realize, y'all, this is as old as it gets as far as our historical timeline. It doesn't get older for us, at least in this part of the world, before the first peoples. And so, as you read through this, give me some information on how new evidence is utilized by historians. Okay, now we're going to look at two migration theories. The first is by a group called the Clovis people, and the second is the coastal migration theory. Now, we're going to watch a video clip here momentarily. What I would like you to do before we even get into that is I really want to play on this first page a little bit. So we're going to introduce this. I'll come back to this master copy, talk a little bit about the Clovis people. But what we're thinking about is just that. How are we even having the discussion of first peoples in America? So if you would please watch this video, and then we'll talk here in just a couple minutes.
Were discovered underwater in a vast cave. Help everyone explore new worlds and ideas. Support your PBS station. 200,000 years ago, a new species emerged on the African landscape. Homo sapiens, modern humans, us. Today, there are 7 billion of us living across planet Earth. This is the story of our journey from continent to continent. How we left Africa, crossed Asia, reached Australia, and colonized Europe. The final frontier was America, the last continent to be conquered. It's one of the great mysteries of archaeology. Who first set foot on American soil? When and how did they get here?
As they moved further and further south, they would know that they were truly the first people to experience those landscapes.
These rivers would have provided all the resources that coastal peoples needed to explore deep into the interior and ultimately colonize all of North America.
As a scientist, it's super exciting if there is a controversy because the result matters. It means something. It's important.
Who were these first Americans? And what became of them? Their story is our story. Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico. 13,500 years ago. A ceremony takes place deep within a cave. A young woman is being buried by her clan. Archaeologists know her as Eva. When alive, she was a hunter-gatherer, like any other prehistoric person. But Eva is special to us. She can lay claim to being the first American. No other remains have been found anywhere in the Americas as old as Eva. Eva's bones were discovered underwater in a vast cave system beneath the forests of Yucatan. There are chambers here the size of cathedrals and tunnels so small it's barely possible to pass through. Mexican archaeologists have been excavating in these caves since 2008. Leading the team is Arturo Gonzalez.
For me, it's like the best way to make archaeology, because you don't need to dig, you don't have dust, and everything is clear.
Most of the bones they find are from animals, but in among them are the remains of prehistoric humans.
We spend a lot of time diving, exploring. When finally you find some human remains, it's like a lottery. It's wow, thanks God, no? You have this great opportunity to touch this evidence. It's like a connection between the past and the future in the present.
But why are there human bones underwater? They weren't washed in. They must have been left here when the caves were dry. During the Ice Age, so much of the world's water was frozen in great sheets of ice that sea levels were lower than today, up to 400 feet lower, pushing back the coastline, changing the shape of the Americas. At that time, the cave system in the Yucatan would have been dry enough for people to enter and bury their dead. The dry phase ended 8,000 years ago. Since then, the caves have been submerged, sealing in and protecting any human remains. In total, Gonzalez and his team have recovered 8 skeletons from the cave system. It's the largest collection of prehistoric humans found at any one site in North America. The star find is this one, Eva of Naharon.
Este fue el primer esqueleto.
This was the first skeleton that we found in the caves. It's also the oldest.
Sabemos que se trata.
We know that this is a young woman because we have the hip bones, which are very different from those of men.
El cráneo también es un buen indicador.
The skull is also a good indicator of the sex of a person.
El cráneo de la mujer de Naharon.
This skull is very delicate, corresponding with a young woman.
Joven.
She was 4 foot 7 inches tall when alive, and still in her 20s when she died. Radiocarbon dating of her bones suggests that happened 13,500 years ago. Archaeologists believe Eva was part of a larger clan of nomads. They lived in the forests, up to 40 miles from the cave system. They only came into the caves to bury their dead. When Eva was discovered, her skeleton was intact and undisturbed. She'd been deliberately placed there, a quarter of a mile from the nearest opening. The evidence suggests Eva was laid to rest in some kind of ritual burial. It's the earliest sign of spirituality anywhere in North America.
Okay, so as we pause this clip here, you should see that it gives you a little bit of background information on this person we call Eva, whose skeletal remains are 13,500 years old. And it's really going to set in motion the question of how did she possibly get here? And the people who were with her, how did they get here? And so what we want to do now is we want to break down a couple of different potential theories, because with anything, especially when we don't have a ton of primary sources, we need to really look at the evidence that we do have to make determinations and hopefully get more information about the first peoples. And so the first theory we're going to look at is a theory called the Clovis people. It's a group of people that they believe very specifically traveled one certain way into the Americas. And so as you're watching this next clip, you can fill this out as you go. But what you're looking at here is describe the first theory. So in complete sentences, tell me what this next clip is telling you. Tell me when this group arrived into the Americas. And then the most important part with anything that we do in this class, what evidence supports this theory? Like, what else is there that is concrete that says, yep, this is probably accurate, or it is more than probably accurate? Okay, so as you're watching this next clip, please fill this out to the best of your ability. We're going to jump ahead here a little bit. We're going to get rid of these tools, go to about 10 minutes in, and again, this is the Clovis people.
Nationalism, but now I understand better why they choose specific places in order to make these burials or make these connections with the source, no?
Such rituals 13,500 years ago are the earliest flickerings of a culture anywhere in the Americas. But for archaeologists, that's a problem. Eva was in the Yucatan centuries before anyone was meant to have entered North America. For decades, it's been assumed that the first Americans arrived from Siberia by foot. During the Ice Age, sea levels were so low, there was a land bridge where the Bering Straits are today. But once people entered Alaska, they could go no further, because Canada was covered by two great ice sheets, an uncrossable barrier. It was only when the world warmed and the ice sheets started melting that a route to the south emerged. In Alberta, the evidence of that southern route is easy to find. A series of giant boulders scattered across the plains. They're known as erratics because they don't belong in this landscape.
So this enormous rock shouldn't actually be here. In fact, its original home is about 100 miles north of here. But it got trapped between these two enormous ice sheets, and it pushed this rock south. As those ice sheets eventually melted, it deposited this rock here. Rocks like this one, they seem isolated, but when we actually map them out on the landscape, they provide us an excellent idea of where a corridor would have opened up between these two giant ice sheets. They really mark a passageway into North America.
Once an ice-free corridor opened, about 13,000 years ago, people could walk south into what is now the United States.
On either side of you are enormous ice sheets that are pulling apart from each other and melting. You would have heard the rush of the meltwater. You would have probably heard cracking ice and large chunks of ice breaking off of these sheets. As they moved further and further south, they would have emerged into a landscape that no humans had ever trodden on before. There would be no signs of human life. They would know that they were truly the first people to experience those landscapes.
This new world was home to herds of great beasts, none greater than the Columbian mammoth. Weighing up to 9 tons, it was a bonanza for any hunter who could kill one. The first evidence mammoths were hunted by early Americans turned up in the 1930s. At a series of sites in the Southwest, archaeologists found spearheads alongside mammoth bones. These spearheads became known as Clovis Points, after one of the sites in Clovis, New Mexico. Ever since, they've been discovered across the United States. They're so common, archaeologists describe the people who made them as Clovis people. This rock shelter in the Ozarks is a new archaeological site. Excavations have only just begun, but it seems Clovis people used the shelter as a campsite. "13,000 years ago, a family group may have stayed here a few days before moving on. Life was dominated by food, finding it, processing, and eating it. Hunter-gatherers are so active, they consume up to 4 times more protein than people today. Metin Aaron is one of the directors of the archaeological site and an expert flint knapper. He can make a Clovis point, as it would have been made by early Americans.
This is a Clovis point, and it's an amazing piece of Stone Age technology. No one in the Stone Age had seen anything like this by the time it was made over 13,000 years ago. Incredibly razor-sharp edges along the entire blade, and because it's got these grooves on both sides, it's easily hafted onto the end of a spear shaft, and thus it could have also easily taken down the largest Stone Age beasts. In a lot of ways, you can consider this to be the first American invention. This is a Clovis point that I made, and a Clovis person would have hafted it onto a piece of wood, to which they would have attached it to a large spear like this made out of cane. They could have then attached the spear to what's called an atlatl, or spear thrower. And with the spear thrower, they would have had just a ton of oomph with which to hit any large Ice Age animals. So that's definitely a kill. Wow. This Clovis point went all the way through this 3-inch target. So you can easily imagine the sort of damage that this would have done to the prey that Clovis people were going after. It's an incredible weapon.
Okay, so that gives you a little bit of information about our first theory, the Clovis people. Now, if you need to take a moment to finish answering these 3 parts of the first theory, please do so again. Describe the theory. When will the group have arrived? What evidence do we have to support this group? This will probably be all that we get through today. There is an exit ticket. Look at the post to see what your exit ticket is. When I see you tomorrow, we will discuss the next migration theory, and that is the coastal migration. And then we'll process through that, and you'll make a determination based on evidence. And then we'll move towards Native American cultures of the Americas, specifically North America, and begin looking at the influence of the indigenous people of our country. Any questions, comments, or concerns, please email me, and I will help you to the best of my ability. You guys are awesome. See ya.